She cleaned classrooms for 22 years. Nobody asked her name. Nobody cared what she knew. Until one night, she picked up a marker and solved a math problem that defeated PhDs for months. The next morning, the entire department was stunned, but it was too late. She had already erased her name. Who was this woman? And why had she been sweeping floors instead of teaching minds? Before the headlines, before the whispers across campus, she was just the woman with the mop. But behind every routine, some stories wait for the right moment to be remembered. This is one of them. She was always there, long before the students arrived, long after they left. Dorothy Carter swept the same hallways every night for 22 years, room by room, light by light, quietly, consistently, unnoticed. She didn't need a name tag. No one ever asked her name. They just called her ma'am, or sometimes nothing at all. She moved with a quiet rhythm. Mop, rinse, wipe, repeat. The sound of her cartwheels echoing in marble hallways no one else walked after dark. To some, she was just a shadow, a pair of weary shoes passing by in the corner of their eye. To others, a background figure, as permanent and forgettable as the old lockers or bulletin boards. But every night, she paused at room 407. It wasn't on her assigned list, but she stopped anyway. Inside, it always smelled of chalk and ambition. Equations still scribbled across the board. A chessboard in the corner left mid-game. Graduate-level math that stretched across the whiteboards like a foreign language, written by minds chasing PhDs and legacies. Dorothy would glance once, then again, then quietly close the door. Nobody knew that room 407 used to be her room, back when the chalk was hers, back when ambition still burned bright behind her eyes, back when she wasn't just a janitor. She lived alone. A modest apartment above a laundromat, 2 blocks from the university gates. A stack of library books on her nightstand, mostly math theory, linear algebra, topology. Not that anyone knew. She cooked the same oatmeal every morning, wore the same gray hoodie every evening, watched the same PBS documentaries before bed, and in a shoebox under her bed, wrapped in an old college sweatshirt, was a faded acceptance letter from MIT. She had once been the top of her class, a rising star. But stars, when they fall, rarely make noise. At work, Dorothy kept to herself. She smiled when spoken to, greeted professors politely, helped lost freshmen find their way, cleaned vomit in silence, picked up broken pencils from under chairs no one remembered sitting in. She never corrected anyone, not when they mispronounced mathematical terms, not when a student mocked her for being too slow, not when a faculty member dropped a coffee and snapped their fingers. She just nodded, cleaned, moved on. People assumed she was uneducated, maybe couldn't speak well, maybe couldn't think well. But Dorothy Carter had once written a paper so groundbreaking, it was discussed at the 1991 International Congress of Mathematicians. It was never published, and no one remembered her name. That didn't matter to her. What mattered was room 407. There was a reason she lingered there each night. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was the problem. A single equation on the board. Massive, arrogant, daring. For weeks it never changed. Each night, new scribbles, new attempts, then erasures, frustration. She could feel it. The weight of failure in the air. The kind of failure only a hard problem could cause. Dorothy smiled at that feeling. She remembered it. It meant growth. And so one evening, when the campus was asleep, She walked into room 407, closed the door behind her, picked up a dry erase marker, and began to write. She didn't expect anyone to see it. She didn't do it to prove anything. She did it because math was still her language, her quiet rebellion, her peace. By the time she was done, the room felt warmer. The problem was solved. Neatly, elegantly, completely. She capped the marker, erased her name, the one she'd signed in the corner almost instinctively, then left without a sound. The next morning, the university would erupt in confusion. The equations would be dissected, cameras would be reviewed, conversations would shift. But tonight, the woman no one noticed, finally left her mark. The cleaning cart rolled down the hallway, wheels humming softly. Behind it, the woman who just rewrote a future. But no one knew that yet. They still only saw the mop, not the mind. Not yet. The sun had barely risen when Professor Malcolm reached room 407. He wasn't expecting anything unusual, just another early morning attempt at cracking the equation that had haunted the department for weeks. It had started as an academic challenge, posted by a visiting scholar from Germany. A multivariable proof involving nonlinear systems and a twist of topological paradox. The kind of problem that separated real minds from eager imposters. Dozens of doctoral candidates had tried. No one succeeded. But that morning, something was different. The board was full, not with scribbles, half-ideas, or desperate notes, but with clean, confident steps. A full solution, line by line, flowing with the elegance of someone who didn't just know the answer, but understood the soul of the problem. Professor Malcolm stared in silence. This wasn't the work of a student. It was masterful, precise, unapologetically bold. He reached for his phone, took photos, then froze when he saw the name written and hastily erased in the corner. Just the trace of a few letters remained, enough to know it was signed. Someone had solved it and didn't want credit. By 9 a.m., the faculty lounge was buzzing. Some professors whispered theories, others doubted the validity, but the math checked out, flawlessly. The university's mathematics chair printed out copies and highlighted sections like scripture. This person knew exactly where everyone else went wrong, she said. And they fixed it, as if they'd seen it 100 times before. The identity of the solver became the focus. Maybe the visiting scholar himself left the answer as a joke. No, the German left last week. Could it be Dr. Zhao? She's been quiet lately. She's on sabbatical in Tokyo. Students were ruled out. The handwriting didn't match. The style was too advanced, too refined. The problem wasn't just solved, it was redeemed. It was art. By noon, someone had the idea to check the hallway cameras, not because they suspected sabotage, but because they needed to know. Who? Who had touched that marker? Who had stepped inside room 407 after hours? Security footage rolled, hour by hour. Nothing. Then, at 2:16 a.m., a figure appeared, a woman in a gray hoodie, pushing a cleaning cart. She entered the room, stayed for 37 minutes, then walked out. Calmly, quietly. Dorothy Carter. When the dean was told, he didn't believe it. Dorothy? The janitor? Silence fell in the room. They replayed the footage. He watched in disbelief as she picked up the marker with ease. Confidence. Grace. The way she paused to think, hands behind her back. The way she corrected her own steps, not hesitating to erase and refine. It wasn't just problem-solving. It was fluency, like watching someone speak in their native language. Meanwhile, Dorothy went about her usual shift. She wiped down desks in the sociology wing, vacuumed a hallway near the admissions office, picked up candy wrappers outside the science lab. She hadn't expected anyone to notice. She hadn't even meant to sign her name. It was muscle memory, a reflex from years past, when she once stood in lecture halls instead of scrubbing their floors. That evening, the math department sent her a message. "Hi, Dorothy. When you have a moment, the dean would like to speak with you. No rush." She didn't reply. She didn't panic either. She just folded the message, placed it in her pocket, and walked toward room 407. Not to repeat what she'd done, but to feel it. The board was erased now, the markers replaced. Yet something had changed. There was reverence in the air, as if the walls remembered. Later that night, after the building had emptied, she stood in the doorway again. And this time, she smiled, not because of recognition, but because for once, she had allowed herself to be seen, even if only by accident, even if only for a moment. Across campus, the story spread like wildfire. Some believed it, some didn't. A few accused the department of making it up, for PR. Others said, "There's no way, she's not even faculty." But in room 407, the only truth that mattered was still on the board. Solved. Definitive. Undeniable. The next morning, Dorothy stood in front of the dean's office. Gray hoodie, work pants, name tag clipped, as always. She knocked once, then stepped inside. She wasn't nervous, because deep down, she knew something they didn't. She hadn't forgotten who she was. They had. And now, it was time to remember. The dean's office was quiet. Dorothy sat across from Dean Russell, a man who'd walked those halls for 30 years, yet never once said more than good evening to her. Now he was leaning forward, fingers folded, eyes filled with something between awe and confusion. He cleared his throat. "Dorothy, I just want to understand. That proof on the board, was that really you?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at the bookshelf behind him. One of the titles caught her eye. Topology, Structures of Continuity, by Dr. Harold L. Barnes. She smiled. "I helped edit that," she said softly. The dean blinked. "I'm sorry?" She leaned back. "Barnes was my professor. He asked me to review early chapters. Said I had a better instinct for gaps than he did." Dean Russell sat frozen. He remembered Dr. Barnes, a legend in their field. "Wait, you studied under Harold Barnes?" Dorothy nodded. "At MIT, class of '92. It was another lifetime." Back then, Dorothy Carter wasn't invisible. She was brilliant, a scholarship kid from Detroit who blew past every standard set before her. By age 20, she was solving problems no one else in her cohort even attempted. She wore her hair in tight braids, carried a battered leather satchel, walked with a quiet fire. Professors adored her. Peers envied her. Some even feared her. Because she made math look like poetry. She didn't just calculate. She understood. Numbers spoke to her. They danced, shifted, told stories only she could read. Her thesis was on the behavior of chaotic systems within bounded rationality. A topic so complex, one of her advisors said, "If she keeps this up, she'll redefine the field." But the world wasn't just equations and logic. It was also perception, politics, prejudice. It started with whispers. "She's too confident. She doesn't collaborate. She always sits at the front like she owns the place." Then came the questions in seminars. "Are you sure this isn't copied? Have you actually read this entire source?" One professor gave her a B+ on a flawless paper, with no comments. When she asked why, he said, "You're smart, Dorothy, but sometimes you come across as intimidating." Then came the interview with the National Research Council. She wore her best suit, had her hair pressed, spoke with clarity and grace. But one panelist leaned in and asked, "Tell me, where exactly did you grow up?" Another asked, "How do you think you'll fit into a field that's, well, traditionally homogeneous?" She understood what they meant. She always understood. Then, all at once, her mother got sick. Her younger brother was arrested. Her scholarship check was delayed. She missed a week of classes, just 1 week. When she returned, no one asked if she was okay. They just said, "You've fallen behind." By the end of that semester, Dorothy made a choice. She withdrew from MIT. No fight, no drama, just a line on a form, a signature at the bottom. She packed her books, folded her dreams, and went home. For years, she drifted, tutoring kids, working nights at the post office, volunteering at shelters. Math became a private thing, a ritual, a refuge. She still solved problems in the margins of old newspapers, still borrowed textbooks from libraries, and wrote her own notes in notebooks no one would ever see. But she never re-entered academia. Because somewhere along the way, she believed the lie. That brilliance without recognition didn't count. That intelligence without titles didn't matter. So she disappeared. Not by force, but by fatigue. Dean Russell leaned back in his chair, stunned. "You were one of the most promising minds in American mathematics," he said. "And we missed you?" Dorothy looked at him, not with anger, but with calm. "You didn't miss me," she said. "You never looked." There was a pause, long, heavy. Then he spoke again. "Why now? Why solve that equation? Why leave your mark?" Dorothy smiled faintly. "I wasn't trying to leave a mark. I just saw a problem that wanted solving." Across campus, the buzz hadn't faded. Rumors turned to headlines. Janitor solves complex math problem overnight. University rethinks talent after stunning discovery. Hidden genius walks among us. Some students called her the ghost of MIT. Others began leaving chalk messages outside room 407. "Thank you, Dorothy." A group of graduate students started a blog titled "Numbers She Never Forgot." But Dorothy didn't post, didn't comment. She just showed up to work the next night, like she always did. Gray hoodie, cart, silence. But something had changed. Professors nodded, students stepped aside, doors opened without her needing to knock. And room 407, it was always spotless now. No one dared touch the board, as if sacred. That week, a student stayed behind after class in room 407. He stared at the proof, still printed and pinned on the bulletin board. "I wish I could ask her how she saw it," he whispered. Behind him, Dorothy quietly mopped the floor. She didn't say a word, but she smiled, because once again, she saw a problem and understood exactly where it wanted to go. It was past midnight. The campus had gone still, the kind of silence you could feel in your chest. Only the hum of emergency lights remained. Dorothy stood in the hallway, outside room 407, hands resting lightly on her cart handle. She glanced around, as if waiting for someone to stop her. No one came. She pushed the door open slowly. It creaked like an old friend exhaling. Inside, the room was dim but familiar. Tables arranged in rough clusters, papers left behind. Equations half solved, still glowing faintly in dry erase ink under the soft overhead lights. And on the board, still, was the problem. Arrogant in its sprawl. Lines, symbols, constraints, assumptions. So many had tried to tame it, each leaving a scar, a mark of struggle, but none victorious. Dorothy stepped forward. The room seemed to inhale with her. She stared at the board for a long while, didn't blink, didn't shift. She wasn't intimidated, not because the problem was easy, but because she had met it before. Not this exact equation, but its shape, its essence, its attitude. She recognized the traps, the red herrings, the false elegance that seduced lesser minds into spirals. She saw through it, like an old warrior reading a battlefield. Dorothy walked to the corner of the room and flipped the light switch. Full brightness bathed the space in clarity. She rolled up her sleeves, reached into her cart, and pulled out a dry erase marker. Black ink, fine tip. She uncapped it slowly, like drawing a sword, then raised her hand to the board, and began. She didn't write like the others, no hesitation, no arrows, no notes to herself. Each symbol landed exactly where it belonged. Each step flowed from the last like verses in a poem. She didn't stop to think, not because she wasn't thinking, but because she had already done all the thinking, years ago. This was muscle, memory, music. Her wrist moved with precision, a sine wave tucked under an integral, a substitution made without fanfare, a radical expression reduced in two elegant motions. She paused only once, at the heart of the equation, where the logic turned on itself. The place where most people gave up. Dorothy didn't. She smiled at that moment, then took a step back, tapped her marker against her palm twice, and continued. To watch her would have been like watching a pianist play a private sonata. There was rhythm in her motion, a tempo, quiet breaths between every line, a beat before closing a bracket, a stillness before setting the final equals sign. The entire room became sacred, a space no longer of desks and deadlines, but of reverence. She was alone, and yet not alone. Every mentor who had once believed in her was there. Every version of herself that had been denied stood beside her. Every door that was closed to her now opened inside this one act. Finally, she stepped back, dropped the marker into the tray with a soft click. The proof stretched across the board, complete, elegant, unassuming, undeniable. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded napkin, wiped the sweat from her brow, then looked at the corner of the board. Instinctively, her hand moved, signing her name. Small, cursive. D. Carter. But the moment it was there, she froze, looked at it, let it sit, then picked up the eraser and wiped it away. She didn't want fame, didn't want applause, didn't need credit. The act itself was enough. To meet a problem that had stumped brilliant minds and whisper gently, "I understand you." That was the gift. That was the reward. She gathered her things, turned off the light, and left the room. The door clicked shut behind her. No one saw her. No one needed to. Because in that hour, in that room, she was no longer the janitor. She was a mathematician, a warrior, a ghost of greatness reclaiming her voice through silence. In the hallway, the cleaning cart rolled softly on the tiles, and behind it walked a woman who had just solved what no one else could. Not for the world, not for a prize, but for herself and the numbers she once loved. The next morning, the chalkboard still held her truth. Professors would crowd around it. Students would whisper. News would eventually spread. But none of them would understand that the loudest statement ever made in room 407 was written in silence. The sun filtered through the windows of room 407, spilling light across the whiteboard. It was still there. The proof, untouched, unsmudged, undisturbed. The markers sat neatly in their tray. The air still carried a faint trace of solvent, as if the room had been sanctified overnight. By 7:30 a.m., the first to notice was Adrian Holt, a second-year PhD candidate. He entered the room half asleep, expecting another frustrating morning of staring at an unsolved monster. Instead, he froze. Eyes wide, mouth slightly open. It was done. All of it. He stepped closer. No scribbles, no guesses, no notes in the margins, just clean, unbroken logic, elegant symmetry, a kind of mathematical truth that made his chest tighten. Adrian blinked, rubbed his eyes, pulled out his phone, started recording. By 8:10 a.m., 4 more grad students had arrived. By 8:40, a professor. By 9:15, the department chair. Room 407 became a gathering place, a shrine. Whispers flew down hallways. Someone solved it. Last night. No name. Have you seen the proof? It's beautiful. Dr. Layla Chen, a senior professor in applied mathematics, examined the board for 15 minutes before stepping back and whispering, "Whoever did this, they weren't just smart. They were surgical." Then, a pause. A breath. This wasn't a solution. It was a lesson. People started speculating. It had to be one of the visiting scholars. Maybe someone from Princeton came in secretly? No, I think it was Dr. Almasi from Data Theory. She's been weirdly quiet lately. But no one recognized the handwriting. No one took credit. And when the chair printed it out and ran it through plagiarism software, it returned blank. Not a match anywhere. Original. Completely. Entirely. By 10:30 a.m., the Dean of Academics was informed. By 11 a.m., it was asked to pull building access logs. At noon, a request was sent to campus security. Please review hallway cameras near room 407 between midnight and 3 a.m. Meanwhile, Dorothy was sweeping leaves outside the humanities building. Same hoodie, same cart. She didn't touch room 407 that morning. She didn't need to. She already knew what was waiting there. That afternoon, she walked past 2 students on the quad. They were discussing it excitedly. Whoever wrote that line around the topological bend, that's genius. I've never even seen that approach before. Right? And did you catch how they folded the symmetry into the contradiction? It's like, I don't know, divine. Dorothy didn't stop, didn't smile. But in her pocket, her fingers curled slightly, as if gripping a marker that wasn't there. At 2:30 p.m., the building services supervisor called her. "Hey, Dorothy, Dean Russell wants to speak with you. Something about a classroom camera?" She paused. "All right," she said. Calm. Even. She hung up. Back in room 407, the board was now being photographed, transcribed, and discussed on Reddit threads with titles like, "Mystery Solver Leaves Department in Awe." "The room 407 proof might be the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Some accused the department of staging it. Others said it was a prank. But the math? It stood. Unshakable. Perfect. At 3 p.m., in a small room behind the security office, 3 faculty members stared at the paused frame. A woman, gray hoodie, cleaning cart, holding a black marker. The timestamp, 2:16 a.m. No one spoke. Then the chair whispered, "That's Dorothy." One professor blinked hard. "The janitor?" Another. "Wait, the one who does the night shift?" Dr. Chen didn't say anything. She just leaned in closer to the screen, watching the still image. Dorothy's posture, her face, the way she held the marker, not awkward, not hesitant, like a sculptor holding a chisel. And suddenly, it all made sense. At 3:17 p.m., Dean Russell made the call. "Dorothy, could you stop by my office when you're free?" She was just finishing wiping down the literature lounge. "Sure," she said. As she walked toward the administration building, the campus was buzzing. Everyone had theories. Everyone had opinions. But no one, not a single one, knew that the answer was quietly making her way down the hallway. She knocked once, opened the door, and stepped inside. Dean Russell didn't rise at first. He just pointed at the monitor, the paused video, the marker in her hand, and asked quietly, "Dorothy, was this you?" Dean Russell didn't stand. He just pointed to the screen. A single frame, paused, Dorothy Carter in her gray hoodie, marker in hand, back straight, chin tilted slightly, eyes on the board, caught in the act of brilliance. She didn't look away, didn't flinch, didn't ask why she was there. Instead, she stepped closer, glanced at the screen, and said quietly, "Yes." The room fell silent. The dean opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. His words were slow, measured, but uncertain. "You wrote the entire proof?" "I did." He leaned back, laced his fingers. "For that equation, the one the department's been stuck on for weeks?" Dorothy nodded. "I've seen it before. Not that exact one, but the structure, the framework. It spoke." Dr. Chen, seated in the corner, finally spoke. Her voice wasn't curious. It was reverent. "Dorothy, who taught you that approach to modular breakdown and contradiction sequences?" Dorothy turned to her. "I taught it to myself. Back in '91? Dr. Chen blinked. "That method only came into papers in the mid-2000s. Dorothy gave a soft shrug. "I guess some of us were just early." The dean leaned forward. There's no record of you in any of our mathematics alumni files. We didn't even know you had a degree." Dorothy smiled faintly. "I don't. I left MIT before graduating." A pause. Dr. Chen's brow furrowed. "You left MIT?" "I did." No one asked why. Not yet, because the weight of what was already revealed had not settled. Instead, the dean gestured to the screen again. "To be honest, I don't know what to say." Dorothy folded her hands. "You don't have to say anything." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Dean Russell cleared his throat. "Dorothy, this is extraordinary, truly. But you must understand, this puts the university in a unique position. People are going to ask questions. They already are." Dorothy nodded. "I figured." The dean hesitated. "There may be media interest, recognition, even awards. Would you be willing to speak publicly?" Dorothy looked at him for a long time, then asked softly, "Would you have believed me if I told you, before the tape?" The room stilled again. The dean didn't answer, because the answer was clear. Dr. Chen softly, "We want to honor you. We want to make this right." Dorothy turned to her. "There is no right. Not anymore. But I would appreciate a chalkboard." They looked at her. "Excuse me?" "A chalkboard. Real slate in a quiet room. No cameras, no microphones. A place where I can write again." Dr. Chen exhaled, smiled. "I think we can make that happen." That evening, the story leaked. No one knew exactly how. Maybe a student overheard. Maybe someone from IT posted a clip. But within hours, the internet was ablaze. University janitor solves complex math problem overnight. Who is Dorothy Carter? Hidden genius discovered through campus camera footage. The comments were a mix of disbelief and awe. No way this is real. If true, she's the most underrated mathematician in America. How many Dorothys have we ignored? Dorothy didn't read them. She didn't care for noise. Instead, she spent the night organizing her cart, rearranged the cleaning supplies, checked the mop handle for wear, as if to remind herself she was still here, still grounded, still real. Later that week, room 310, an old, unused lecture hall, was opened for her. Fresh chalk, an untouched board, a key, and a single note from Dr. Chen. "Whatever you write here, you don't have to erase." Dorothy stepped into the room alone, stared at the empty slate, picked up a stick of chalk, then, slowly, began to write again. Not for grades, not for recognition, but for the numbers, the only ones who had never stopped listening. Chuyen Nisang, Chapter 6. Outside that chalk-filled room, something had begun to shift. The questions were louder now. The attention was mounting. But Dorothy, she was preparing for something bigger than press releases, because this time, she wasn't solving a problem. She was about to teach them all what seeing truly meant. The conference room on the third floor had never felt smaller. It was built for 20, but today, there were 32. Professors, administrators, deans, even a couple of trustees, all gathered to discuss one thing, one name: Dorothy Carter. The projector was on. On the screen, photos of the proof from room 407, the paused video frame of Dorothy holding the marker, and now, a screenshot of trending hashtags. Dorothy Carter, Jachasari, Forgotten Genius, Sarku Tuktin, Who We Overlook. Someone had pulled a clip from a 1991 MIT alumni directory and posted it online. There, next to 3 other future professors, was Dorothy's face. Bright-eyed, determined, ready. The caption: "She could have been anything. So why did we make her invisible?" Dean Russell stood at the front of the room, hands in his pockets, voice steady but low. "I called this meeting because this isn't just a moment. This is a mirror." There were murmurs, some nodded, some folded arms. One trustee, an older man in a blue suit, cleared his throat. "With all due respect, what do you expect us to do? She was a janitor. Now she's a hero. Wonderful. But what's the action plan?" Dr. Chen turned to him. "The action plan is reflection. She didn't just solve an equation. She exposed a flaw." A younger professor from the philosophy department spoke next. "I've taught here 10 years. I've walked past her countless times. I've never asked her name." Another added, "She cleaned my office every Thursday. I always said thank you. I thought that was enough." Silence, as if the word enough hung in the air, daring someone to challenge it. Then, from the corner, the director of diversity and inclusion spoke. Soft voice, firm tone. "She is not an anomaly. She is evidence. Evidence that brilliance exists in places we don't look, that potential isn't limited to resumes and framed degrees. She is what happens when we fail to ask, who else have we left behind?" Someone at the back whispered, "But how would we have known?" Dr. Chen responded without turning. "We didn't need to know. We just needed to see." Dean Russell stepped forward again. "There are now media requests, national publications, a TED invitation. We've received calls from 3 math institutes asking if we can send them the full solution for analysis." "But Dorothy..." He paused. "Dorothy declined all of them. She doesn't want interviews. She asked for chalk and silence." A professor from engineering frowned. "She has every right to stay private, but we must do something. For the students. For the message." Another chimed in. "She doesn't need a plaque. She needs a platform." Someone else added, "We should name a lecture series after her. Or a fellowship." More voices joined. Ideas, initiatives, funding. Suddenly, everyone had a suggestion. Suddenly, everyone wanted to be part of her story. Dean Russell raised a hand, let the room quiet, then said, "If we're not careful, we'll turn her into a symbol and forget she's a person. Let's not make the second mistake worse than the first." There was a long pause. Then slowly, the conversation shifted. From planning to accountability. From reaction to reckoning. They began reviewing hiring practices, admissions language, the visibility of support staff, access to continuing education. One professor suggested an internal audit. Not just who we hire, but who we hear. Another said, "We need to build systems that ask better questions, that assume greatness can wear overalls and carry a mop." Heads nodded. The room was changing. Not fast, but intentionally. Outside, the campus buzzed. A group of students had created a mural near the library. Dorothy's face painted in black and white, gazing upward, with the phrase, "She saw the numbers. We finally saw her." Dorothy walked past it once, paused, looked at the eyes they painted. They were hers, but also not. They belonged to the version of her the world now wanted to honor. She respected it, but she didn't belong to it, not entirely. That night she returned to room 310, her private space, her chalkboard, her peace. On the board, she had begun a new sequence, not a problem to solve, but a concept to teach. She titled it, "Access as Assumption, a Framework for Inclusive Logic." It wasn't just math, it was philosophy. It was resistance. It was grace. In the quiet of that room, Dorothy began to draft what would become the most unlikely lecture ever delivered at the university. Not because of its content, but because of who they'd finally invited to speak, and who they had waited too long to listen to. It began with a drawer, old, beige, dusty, stuck halfway for years, buried in the back of the university archives. The file was labeled in fading ink, MIT transfers, incomplete 1990s. Inside, folders, most thin, notes scribbled, drop forms, forgotten transcripts. But one was different, thick, neat, marked, Carter, Dorothy M. It held more than papers. It held proof. Letters of recommendation, one from Dr. Harold Barnes himself. Dorothy is not simply gifted, she is singular. She sees patterns the rest of us study for years and still miss. If there is a future of mathematics, I believe it lives inside her. There was a handwritten note from another professor. She asked questions no student had ever dared. Questions I hadn't thought of in 20 years. There were copies of midterm solutions, every problem annotated, explained as if she were teaching the examiner. There was even a draft of a thesis proposal. Title: Chaos and Community: Mathematical Models for Social Drift in Urban Environments. It wasn't just math, it was revolutionary. A blueprint for mapping inequality using complex systems, 30 years ahead of its time. At the bottom of the folder, a withdrawal form, signed and dated, March 14th, 1992. No explanation, just one sentence in the margin. Life happens. This isn't goodbye to math. Just goodbye to the institution. The staff member who found the file, a graduate student working part-time, brought it to Dr. Chen. She stayed up all night reading it, each page more unbelievable than the last. By morning, she sat at her desk, holding the file like a sacred text. She wasn't overlooked, she whispered. She was erased. Dr. Chen brought the file to Dean Russell. They read it together. There was nothing else to say. Everything they needed to understand was already in Dorothy's handwriting. The next day, they asked to meet her again. She arrived at the dean's office wearing the same gray hoodie, same calm. They handed her the folder. Her eyes scanned the label. She knew what it was before she opened it. Slowly, she flipped through the contents, paused at her thesis draft. Her hand brushed the page gently, like greeting a memory. "I thought they'd lost this," she said. Dean Russell shook his head. "No, we just never looked for it." They sat in silence. Then Dr. Chen spoke. "We'd like to help you publish this. The world needs to see it." Dorothy looked at them. "Now you want to show them I was brilliant." "I never needed that." Dean Russell nodded. "We know. But maybe someone else does." She closed the folder, held it for a moment, then whispered, "Maybe." That evening, Dorothy returned to room 310. She placed the folder on the desk, opened a blank notebook beside it, and began to write again, not in chalk, but in pen. Her first sentence: "What happens when a system designed to recognize genius only listens when it wears a suit?" She paused, then underlined it, twice. The next day, an undergraduate student named Mariah knocked gently on the open door of room 310. "I heard you were here," she said softly. "I'm studying math, but I don't see myself in any of the people who teach it." Dorothy looked up, smiled, then pulled out a chair. "Let's fix that," she said. And just like that, room 310 was no longer just a place of healing. It became a place of building, of mentoring, of legacy. Because Dorothy Carter wasn't simply someone who solved what others couldn't. She was becoming the teacher they never knew they needed. Room 310 was never meant to be a classroom. The lights flickered, the chairs didn't match, the clock on the wall was stuck at 6:17, but for the students who began to gather there each Thursday evening, it became something sacred. Not because of its design, but because of who stood at the chalkboard. Dorothy never advertised her sessions. She didn't print flyers or send emails. It started with one student, Mariah, who told a friend, then another, and another, until the mismatched chairs were full. Some students sat cross-legged on the floor. Others leaned against the walls. No one took attendance. No one asked for credit. They came because they wanted to. Her sessions weren't lectures. They were invitations. She'd begin with a question, not about equations, but about the world. What does symmetry mean when the world is not symmetrical? What happens when logic meets injustice? Then she'd turn to the board, draw a curve, a function, a paradox, and slowly, methodically, walk the room through not just how to solve, but why the problem even mattered. She wove stories into the math, told them how she once watched a housing policy collapse because someone misunderstood probability, how traffic in her neighborhood wasn't about bad drivers, but failed variables in public modeling, how the most brilliant people she'd ever met never made it into the rooms where equations were written. In her class, students weren't underprepared. They weren't behind. They weren't not math people. They were curious, capable, welcome. She had one rule. If you feel stupid, we stop. If you feel powerful, we continue. It wasn't about pity. It was about restoration. For every student who had once been told they weren't smart enough, fast enough, technical enough, room 310 became an undoing and a beginning. Mariah began asking bolder questions. James, an engineering major who had failed linear algebra twice, started showing up early, volunteering to solve problems on the board. Even Chloe, who hadn't touched math since high school, began keeping a journal of patterns she saw in clouds, music, and crowds. Dorothy didn't grade. She didn't correct with red ink. She asked questions, pushed gently. Let them think out loud. Let them fail loudly. Let them rise fully. One night, a professor from the statistics department peeked inside. He stayed for 20 minutes, didn't say a word. Later, he told a colleague, "I haven't seen students listen like that in years. They weren't memorizing. They were waking up." Word spread, slowly, then quickly. A journalist from an education magazine sat in once, wrote a feature titled, "The Unofficial Class That's Changing Everything." An excerpt. She never raises her voice, but the silence around her is electric. Students don't lean in because they're afraid. They lean in because they feel seen. Still, Dorothy refused official titles. She declined offers to teach for credit. She turned down keynote requests. "I already have the classroom I need," she said. But when asked why she kept going, she answered simply, "Because someone once taught me in a way that made me believe I could be great. I'm just returning the favor to people who haven't heard it yet." One evening, after class, Mariah lingered. She looked at the board, where Dorothy had written 3 lines. "The system isn't broken. It's working exactly as built, so we must build something else." Mariah asked, "Is that about math?" Dorothy turned to her. "It's always about math," she said, "because math is the only thing that tells the truth, even when people won't." That truth, once hidden in chalk and silence, was now echoing. Not just in room 310, but across departments, across communities. Because Dorothy Carter wasn't just rewriting equations. She was rewriting what it meant to teach and to matter. It was buried in a forgotten corner of the internet. A 10-year-old video, never published, uploaded privately to a student's drive, lost to time and the shuffle of old files. Title, Dorothy Carter, TEDx Detroit, unaired. Date, 2013. Venue, a small red-curtained stage. No spotlight, no fanfare, just a single microphone, and a woman in a gray cardigan walking slowly toward the center. A graduate student at the university, now researching Black mathematicians in American history, stumbled across it while compiling data for a thesis. She clicked play out of curiosity, then sat in silence for the full 18 minutes. By the time it ended, her hands were shaking. She watched it again, then uploaded it. And within days, the world had seen it too. The video opens with Dorothy adjusting the mic. She doesn't smile right away. She looks down, then says simply, "I never thought I'd be standing here. Because most of the rooms I walked into didn't think I belonged." She tells the story of her first math competition, age 15, where the judge mistook her for the girl who brought coffee. She talks about scoring in the top 1% nationwide, only to be told it must have been a clerical error. She shares how at MIT she once corrected a professor during lecture and was called aggressive in her evaluation that week. Then she pauses, looks directly into the audience. Math is not neutral. We pretend it lives in clean equations and whiteboards, but who gets to write on those whiteboards? That is political. The crowd is quiet, not out of discomfort, but reverence. Dorothy continues. The hardest part of being brilliant in a world that doesn't expect you to be is learning to shine anyway. And sometimes you shine alone, in silence, in shadows, where no one claps, but you still solve the problem. At minute 12, her voice softens. She speaks not as a warrior, but as a woman who once believed she had failed. I left academia not because I lost faith in math. I left because I lost faith in being seen. But what I've learned is this: the numbers never left me. They waited. And when I was ready, They welcomed me home. Her final words echo, quiet and deliberate. If you've ever been brilliant in secret, this talk is for you. If you've ever solved a problem no one knew existed, this talk is for you. And if you've ever wondered whether you still matter, you do. When the video ends, there is no applause, just silence. Then, as the camera pans out, the audience slowly rises to their feet, one by one. A standing ovation, not recorded in sound, but in posture. In the present, the video goes viral, viewed millions of times within a week, shared by educators, scientists, journalists, mothers, teenagers. Hashtags trend again. Brilliant in secret. Dorothy taught me the talk we needed. Major news outlets replay clips. Podcasts analyze every line. Mathematicians from around the world cite her phrasing in lectures and keynote speeches. But Dorothy, she stays quiet. Not because she's avoiding the attention, but because she said what needed to be said 10 years ago, and it was finally heard. That evening, in room 310, a group of students arrive with something in hand, a framed still from the video. Dorothy standing in mid-sentence. Below it, engraved, "Math never forgot me. I never stopped solving. I just stopped asking for permission. D. Carter." They hang it on the back wall, not for her, but for the ones who will come after. And just like that, Dorothy's voice, once dismissed, once delayed, became a lighthouse. Not loud, not flashy, but steady and visible, at last. The university's spring convocation that year was different. There was no celebrity speaker, no award-winning author, no tech visionary flown in from Silicon Valley. Instead, the final 10 minutes of the ceremony were reserved for a name that had never graced that stage before. A name that once lived only on shift schedules and custodial records. Dorothy M. Carter. She didn't walk across the stage. She didn't want to. Instead, she sat quietly in the front row, a student on either side, watching the dean step up to the podium with a single embossed folder in hand. He cleared his throat, held the silence, then read, "For contributions to mathematics, both seen and unseen. For teaching not from a podium, but from presence. For showing us the power of knowledge unclaimed by ego. We hereby confer upon Dorothy Carter an honorary doctorate in mathematical philosophy." The applause was thunderous, not polite, not obligatory. It was real. Because by then, everyone knew. They knew her story. They knew her silence. They knew her work. But more than that, they knew what they had almost missed. Later that evening, in a quiet hallway just outside the mathematics wing, a new plaque had been installed. Simple, elegant. It read, "The Carter Commons. Dedicated to every mind we failed to see." Below that, a quote, not from her TED Talk, not from any article, but from a note she had once scribbled in the margin of her notebook. Greatness doesn't announce itself. It waits, patiently, until someone is finally ready to listen. Dorothy never spoke much about the attention. She still walked the campus in her hoodie, still greeted people by name, still paused when she passed room 407. But now, students stopped her, not to praise, to ask, to learn, to thank. Her Thursday sessions in room 310 became a fixture. So popular, professors began attending as students. No grades, no syllabus, just questions, just chalk, just the sound of learning finding its way home. One day a freshman, nervous, wide-eyed, stayed after. "Miss Carter," she said, "how do you stay so calm when the world tries to forget you?" Dorothy smiled, then said, "Because forgetting isn't the same as erasing." I never disappeared. I was just waiting for them to catch up. A year later, the Department of Mathematics unveiled a new fellowship, the Dorothy Carter Initiative, full scholarships for underrepresented students pursuing research in mathematics and philosophy. Not just in her name, but in her spirit. No application essays, no recommendation letters, only one requirement. Tell us what problem you've been thinking about in silence. Around the country, other schools took notice. More universities reached out. More students began citing her work. Her 1991 thesis draft, once buried in a file drawer, was published in a leading interdisciplinary journal, praised for its prophetic brilliance. The academic world tried to catch up to her, years late. And Dorothy? She never rushed them. She let them learn, the same way she taught, quietly, patiently, exactly when they were ready. One crisp morning, long after the crowds had faded and the headlines moved on, Dorothy stood once more in room 407. The board was clean, the room empty. She held a marker in her hand, paused, then wrote just one sentence across the center. "The world is full of answers we've yet to hear, because we never asked the right people." She underlined it, stepped back, and this time, she didn't erase it. Dorothy Carter's story is not a fairy tale. It is a caution and a call. Because for every Dorothy we finally see, there are hundreds more walking past us every day. Unseen, unheard, unbelievably brilliant, and still waiting. If her story moved you, even for a second, type the word "seen" in the comments. Because too many like Dorothy live in silence. Let's remind the world, they were always here. We just didn't look. Black Voice Matter.